in some ways it's a continuation of the same, but it's at a different level. It's having a broader impact, the kind that you always imagine and hope that your work would. But having this platform and this story, like this story at this level, it's just incredible to be a part of that. You know, me aside, the film, what it's doing, how it's just opening this chapter of American history that is astonishing people. And it and, you know, moments like it through history in Indian country are, you know, common knowledge for us. Even though Osage Reign of Terror was not spoken about for a long time, even within the community, you know, just the awareness of what we've gone through, you know, our relationship with the U.S. government, all the ways that, you know, our tribal sovereignty has been eroded over the years, our access and our ability to manage our own finances, our own money, all of these things are, you know, they're known to us, and it's just incredible to be a part of what feels like an historical moment that's even bigger than just the film, you know.
I mean, it's also not all ancient history. I mean, some of the conflicts that you're talking about occurred in, you know, on the land that you grew up on, and I think that isn't drilling still an issue on some of your tribal native lands?
Yeah, I mean, the Blackfeet, we've been pushing back those leases in the Badger 2 Medicine, our sacred land, for, you know, kicking it back every 20 years for the last 50, 60 years. And finally, like, we've recently won that long battle and that's secured. But yeah, mineral extraction, leasing of surface grazing land. You know, there was you know, one of my heroes is also a Blackfeet woman who's passed away named Eloise Cabell, and she was the first civilian, I guess, to successfully sue the federal government for mismanagement of tribal trust funds. You know, the leasing of our lands. Eloise created the Native American Bank, which is a branch in Browning, and it's all around Montana, and specifically, you know, for Native people. And she was managing people's funds and noticed all of these discrepancies in their income. It's like, your family has, you know, 100 acres that you're leasing out for ranching land, or your family is, you know, on at a fracking site, and where's all this money being funneled into basically storage in the U.S. Treasury, going to this big unnamed pot with no directions about where to forward this money. Eloise saw these missing pieces in her accounting, and then brought it to a federal level lawsuit, which was settled. And it wasn't just the Blackfeet people that were on that. Like, there were a lot of different tribal nations on the Cabell lawsuit and on the settlement. But it's similar. It was created during this period of allotment, same that impacted Osage. The mineral rights, the mineral estates with Osage are oil, and you know, specifically, there's language for, you know, like in the film, Everett Waller saying we should have known that with this money would bring something else. It's a specific story, but it's in Indian country also a very universal one.
I ought to kill these white men who killed my family. I need you here.
I am right here.
I mean, my name, Lily, I'm the namesake of my great-grandmother, and my father, being the oldest boy of all of his cousins and his family, it's a very traditional thing that the oldest grandchild is raised by, or at least raised very much with, their grandparent. So my dad spent so much time with my great-grandma Lily, almost as much as my cousin Deline, who she raised. It's her granddaughter that she raised as her daughter. But the stories that I was given, being her namesake and being my grandma's oldest granddaughter, I carry my family legacy, and I'm expected to carry my family legacy in a way. And when I when I was offered the role of Mollie Burkhart on Mollie Burkhart's birthday, which nobody designed, it just happened that way, it felt a little bit like, I don't know, maybe Mollie reaching through time a little bit and like tapping me on the shoulder for it or something. Just a wonderful sign off, but also an immediate reminder. It's like my excitement about booking this role. It's like, this is a real woman. And she was born only 10 years before Grandma Lily, and there's a lot of similarities. They went through a lot of the same things. My Grandma Lily's husband and Ernest probably, would have been friends, even though, my grandpa was Native as well, but just had this kind of, this larger than life sort of cowboy presence in the world. But yeah, I charged myself with carrying Mollie and carrying the story around her the way I would expect somebody to handle a story about my grandmother Lily. And that gave just an immediate understanding and love, as far as both of them, my grandma and Mollie, being women who were very traditional and known and held and loved by their community, spoke their language fluently, but also were very devout Catholics and had a very specific relationship with Catholicism and with tradition. And, and just having conversations about how I understood her and how I understood that whole presence in my family and our family history. Is, my family, our clan, our Blackfoot clan are the fish eaters, and we became the fish eaters when we adopted Catholicism because of, Fridays. So otherwise for Blackfoot Confederacy, eating fish is a taboo. So all of these moments of how culture changes, evolves, becomes in some ways hybridized or becomes a new thing. Like, I don't even like saying hybridized. It's just an indigenous articulation of new things. So I wanted to carry Mollie with that because the 20s were the roaring 20s. It is history. It's 100 years ago, but it's in a lot of ways more modern than the way that we're used to seeing Native people depicted. It's Native people in a very modern setting. And you're seeing how Native people embrace money, embrace fine things, embrace, just a new way of life and make it entirely their own. So I wanted Mollie to reflect that in the same way that my grandma Lily did, the same way that my grandma Lily cared for her whole family and is the reason that we're all still here. Yeah, it was, even though I'm not Osage, it did very much feel like it was in my blood. Yeah, there are some very specific Native role models on screen that planted a seed very early. My original first great actress is Sheila Tousey. She was a muse and a friend of Sam Shepard's. Sheila had this incredible performance, which kind of emulates in some ways Anna Mae Aquash in the American Indian movement in this movie Thunderheart that Val Kilmer is the lead of. And when I was little, Val Kilmer and Willow as Mad Mardigan. I'm not the only one who feels this way. That almost felt like Indigenous representation to a lot of people. It's like the long hair, the sense of humor, everything. It's just you felt like you were watching a Native on screen. So anyways, but in Thunderheart, even though he's the lead of it, for me, Sheila Tousey's presence in that film was just everything. And she's kept her career largely in theater, but she's just so stunning and transcendent on film, and she's just the most wonderful person. I was blessed in my career to be able to join her on stage at Oregon Shakespeare Festival, where she still is she's still in residence, and she's doing Mannahatta at the Public right now. She's, lifelong theater woman, and so beautiful, so incredible, and really was one of my first memories of a woman on screen. The way that she commanded that role, the way that she made it feel so much like a woman I wanted to be. Not even like as an actress with aspirations, but just the strength and grace that she carried. Also, John Trudell in that film. Talk about arts and activism. One of our great leaders and greatest artistic minds in Indian country. So yeah, we had them. There's not much. Like when you look at, these studies that are coming out that really break down how dismal the percentage of Native representation is. Yet we find them, when we're on screen, we pour, like everybody turns out and just pours everything into those performances, those films, buys them. I feel like a lot of Native families, their shelves, which are, a lot of places still largely VHS, because a lot of our movies came out in that VHS era. I feel like a lot of us have the same catalog, the same shelf, and really idolize a lot of the same performances.
You allow yourself to imagine the possibility?
Leo asked me kind of the same thing our first week of shooting. And I told him, I cannot think about it. The only thing I'm thinking about is Mollie and this story. It is, of course, something I have to think about. Insofar as I would just really love to speak some of my language and teach myself a little bit more of my language to have and hold in that moment. So that's my charge. But it's just, it's good incentive to do that anyway. It's always good to know how to give great thanks in your native tongue. That's just a good thing to aspire to. Other than that, it would be an incredible moment in my life, but it would mean so much more than just me. And we'll just see what happens.
Where did you get your grace?
Oh, probably ballet. Long before I wanted to be an actress, I had aspiration to be a dancer. And performance is performance. It was something that my parents saw was an opportunity they could plug me into, because there was a ballet teacher in Browning the right years when I was 5, and just enrolled me in class. And then when she moved to a different city, we followed her. And actually, this is a wonderful full circle moment, talking about the grace of Osage women. My hero, before I had acting aspirations and wanted to be a ballerina, was Maria Tallchief, America's first prima ballerina. Danced with Ballet Russe, was married to George Balanchine, foundational to New York City Ballet. Maria, her dances, the way that she did the Firebird, the very first Sugar Plum Fairy, she had grace and ferocity and such impeccable control on stage. And just, she's on YouTube, watch her dances, they're transcendent. But she was also Osage, from Fairfax, the same town that Mollie Burkhart was from. Maria was born in the early 20s. She would have been very young during this era. But she was on Earth at the same time and in the same place as these people. The blankets that I wore in the film were, I believe, her mother's. They were in the Tallchief family. So the bright one with the pink, where Ernest is helping Mollie into the car after church, is the one that's the first photo people saw of production, the kind of pink fringy one. And then the first introduction of Mollie, the Argyle, the green Argyle. Those were all from the Tallchief family. But when I had my first fitting with Julie O'Keefe, the Osage costumer that worked with Jacqueline West, and she tied me into my broadcloth skirt and to hold the butterfly pleat, I just immediately oh, okay. And then holding the blanket the way you have to hold it, I was I told Julie, I can see how Osage gave birth to America's first prima ballerina. This makes sense. Other than that, it's very circumstantial. I'm not always the most graceful person. I did want to be an Ewok when I was a kid, so I've got that side of me too.
Shomikasi. That's how you are.
I don't know what she said, but it must have been Indian for handsome devil.
I mean, it's multi-layered. It's placing at the heart of the story a love story, as, horrendous and skewed as it is. It wasn't good love, but it was love. That's an element. I hope that this film sets a precedent in how projects that work heavily within another culture's history, especially one that is such an open wound, how they conduct themselves, how they engage with community, how, Marty just wanted what felt most true to this moment, so he wasn't going to be precious about his idea of it. He wanted to hear from people what it was. So in that collaboration with the nation, it's a historic moment in film, and I hope that it's one that can be a bit of a guiding light. I know that there's basically a list that was accumulated by Illuminative for non-natives working within Native communities and representation, like just basically do's and don'ts. And that, I know that they used that. Like they had it, everybody read it, everybody kind of set community meetings against this protocol. So that was incredibly helpful that that was actually utilized, because there are a lot of organizations that are doing this work to really help refine what our representation looks like, and not as many people use those resources. And in another way, in creating Mollie Burkhart, there was the awareness that I was playing a real living, breathing woman who not many people alive will remember what her voice sounds like, will remember her movements, her actions. So it was being very, very deliberate and very open and receptive to finding out who she may have been and the legacy that she left, and the way her grandchildren are. Like Margie Burkhart, her granddaughter, just is an incredibly graceful woman. Janice Carpenter, who was my language teacher, also shaped that a lot. An incredibly graceful Osage woman. And in that world of this this just precious, enigmatic, contained, measured grace of these women, you see that emulated in the great performances of films in the 1950s, you know, Elizabeth Taylor, Lauren Bacall. And this was an era of our history that natives kind of got placed into the bloodthirsty savage trope. Our representation on film through the golden age of cinema was not a graceful one. It wasn't a dignified one. So there was, because this is Martin Scorsese, because he is a walking encyclopedia of film, of cinema, because he is one of the great masters. He's, it feels like he carries the golden age of cinema in him, and in making this film and making it in a way that also honored that legacy, it was a very restorative moment, bringing a Native woman into that place. You know, having Mollie and her sisters be these characters that you would have seen in a great sweeping epic of the 1950s, of the 1940s. It put us back in a place that we've been missing for a long time. So as an actress, there's the element of holding truth to who Mollie was as an Osage woman and how the community remembers her, wanted her to be held and depicted. There's also honoring film history, what kind of leading lady would have existed in this type of film. As our reference points were The Heiress, Olivia de Havilland won an Oscar for that one. That was kind of our main one. Place in the Sun, a lot of the Montgomery Clift films. So, yeah, I think in the sense of how that collaboration worked with the nation, centering a Native woman in this complicated love story that was so challenging and so rewarding to chew on. One that Margie Burkhart has said it was amazing to see how it maybe could have been, because there's a big question mark still. It's like this couple did, you know, the community remembers that they loved each other, but how do we actually show that? Nobody was in it that's still around to remember it. So that was fantastic. And then, yeah, restoring a place in the great American cinema for a Native actress, for a Native character, for Native women to have this lens, this sort of old Hollywood lens on them for a moment. Yeah, after I watched it the first time, I texted Leo, and just in our back and forth, it was like, oh my God, we did it. Because there was always that question. And we shot the scenes several different ways, even if the text on the page remained the same. There was one week where we hadn't really solved what that love was, what it would have looked like if it's going to translate to the audience without it just looking underdeveloped or whatever it is. And we had a lot of little clues. We had a lot of little, I brought in some Osage storytelling elements to help me understand what this dynamic would have looked like through Mollie's eyes. But yeah, when all is said and done, like, we had that first week, we tried initially, the thought was we were going to shoot in sequence so we could fish that out as the story developed and really sink into what worked and what didn't. As productions go, sometimes you have to move something that's really far down the timeline up to the first week, which is what happened. We had to move a pretty tense scene from the third act into the third day of filming. And Leo and I had only just warmed up on that first dinner scene. So to go from like these characters, essentially their first date, to deep in their marriage, deep into all of the murders that are happening, it was a little bit of a breakneck thing, and it was definitely felt like a moment to try and, just as an actress, prove myself a little bit. But that's going to say that when we were filming that scene, we hadn't solved point A to B and what the dynamic was going to be, what this love was. We hadn't really cracked it. So it was shot a number of different ways, with a number of different levels of suspicion in Mollie of what her husband is doing, a number of different levels of love that Ernest would have had for her, levels of verbal abuse, levels of control, levels like how much is he emulating his uncle in this, how much is he like trying to throw Mollie off the scent, how complicit is he in it, and then same with Mollie, like what are her feelings about him now, does she feel trapped in this, does all of it. We shot that scene probably 8 different ways, and the ones that survived continually, the ones that worked, were the ones where there was this complicated love and this tortured complicity on his part, no matter how aware he was of it at any given point. And honestly, I think that's the one that worked, because that's the one that would have been closest to reality, and that's the one that's closest to really what it is. Like Leo and I talked about it also when we were filming, just as a reference point, and what the analogy of this love story would be, and the idea of, like, it's been said a lot recently, especially in the last few years, of it's not just enough to not be racist anymore. You have to be actively anti-racist. And that definitely wasn't the conversation in the 20s, but it's the same thing. It's the same the same need to challenge yourself out of that complicity. And I think it's so important that that lens is the journey that audiences, the broader audience that sees this, is going to go on. And really you can plug it into a lot of different conversations, but just that you can love someone or something and depend on them fully and just be extracting and taking everything from them. And it's, sometimes, this is the other thing that I love, and it's not even my scene, the essentially breakup scene between Ernest and Hale in the jail cell. It's in the trailer, so I don't feel like I'm going to spoil anything, but that was written at one point to be very violent, very confrontational, like Hale reaching through the bars and slamming Ernest's head on it, Ernest reaching through and punching his uncle. All of these different things were possibilities. But in the end, again, what worked, and it's really just as simple as saying, no, this isn't common, this isn't normal, and I'm going to walk this way now. No great drama, no great slug out, just a great choice. And, then at that point, I don't know, then it becomes a Marty signature Catholic redemption story in some ways, but it's a conversation starter. It It didn't end up being a historical piece that's a detailed like formation of the FBI. If people are interested in that, it's widely documented. You can read the book. And that was essentially what the first meeting was with Marty and Leo after the script revisions had happened, was talking about how this love story could serve as an access point. And the same way that in that meeting I compared it to Graham Greene's The Quiet American, and the love triangle in that story serving as, you know, a small stage for the entire Vietnam conflict and the imperialistic forces there and the way that that all played out. I think that may have been the moment where Marty was like, yes, this is the collaboration, this is going to be the process, this is going to be the inroad. I'm sure he was already thinking it, but yeah, it was, that's when I think it clicked where the combination of the three of us could maybe make that happen. So yeah, it was really nice watching the film, getting to text Leo, be like, wow, we somehow made that work. Because somehow in reality it did work. And somehow it still works. You know, this dynamic is not a new one, not an old one. It's just, it is a very real one.
I think
It's, yeah, it's got its own pace, it's got its own rhythm, it's temporary. So like anything that is temporary and fleeting, you just have to enjoy the moment. And it's been wonderful to spend time with people that became such, you know, they were my world for 6 months making this film. And then, you know, the hardest part of this job is you get so close to people and then the contract ends and then it's on to the next one. So it's been wonderful just enjoying being with this group again, falling back into the same rhythm, the same friendships. Like that's been really incredible. You know, it's been a really touching string of introductions and like some of my favorite filmmakers reaching out, just wanting to call and say congratulations, and those little things. You know, it's important to enjoy those things. All of the gifts, which then I get to share with all of my people back home. Yeah, there's. I know this is part of it. I know this is a incredible moment that I'm getting to experience, and yeah, if I enjoy it, then I think everybody else who's enjoying it with me is happy.